All right, that was the end of focal point. Now we're going to speak about the use of rhythm as a principle. Rhythm and pattern. So, rhythm is created numerous ways, but basically it comes down to the use of some form of repetition. Repetition of color, repetition of size, repetition of mark making, repetition of contrast. Whatever rhythm you create is created through some sort of repeated thing. It's not necessarily a pattern, but it's something that's done over and over and over. So in this case, we have this piece by Piet Mondrian that is titled Broadway Boogie Woogie. Now, it is during World War II. It is simply rectangles using only the three primary colors: little squares, little rectangles, yellow, red, blue. Varying sizes. Okay? Now, Boogie Woogie was a form of music at this time period, and I'm going to play you some Boogie Woogie music while you look at this piece so you can get a sense of something different here. Let's see. Now, what I want you to think about is imagine New York City, which is the Broadway that Mondrian is speaking of, the nightclubs, the traffic, Times Square, and imagine yourself up on top of a skyscraper looking down at all the lights below, and that music playing and rising up from the street below you from the various nightclubs. Now, this is a piece that you almost have to be able to hear the music as well as look at the painting at the same time for it to really kind of have any kind of sense to you. But he's trying to create a sense of the rhythm of the city, the rhythm of the music that's being played in the city, the pulsing of the traffic, the neon lights, the flashing bulbs, the theater marquees, all of that with just using little colored rectangles, broken up into kind of a street grid. Okay? So this one almost always has a kind of an audio component. Now, this is one of the pieces we saw very early in the semester when we were talking about form and content and what is art. Nude Descending a Staircase, one of the earliest Cubist paintings. And, lots of shape, lots of line. And Duchamp is attempting to show an entire sequence of events from the top of the steps down to the bottom, all in one painting. Now, the art of animation existed at this time, but it hadn't really broken into the mainstream. So this is almost a single painting of animated movement overlaid. If you took a bunch of tracing paper or a bunch of film, like clear plastic film, and drew on top of it, on top of it, on top of it, on top of it, and then layered them all together, it could very well look like this. And as technology advanced and faster shutter speeds on the camera were developed in the 20th century, the reality of what Duchamp was trying to show came true. So this photograph was done of the famous golfer Bobby Jones, and what it was is simply the shutter would keep opening and closing super fast, but it was only exposing one frame of film. So instead of like the very old multi-shot things that showed like horses running or people running or something like that, you've seen those before, this showed the entire action in one single image. So you can see, especially when Bobby gets up here, this intense overlapping, these rounded blurs of his body. We can kind of see his face, but if we go back, some of this overlapping stuff, we see the rear end, the dotted lines of the motion, arms and legs swinging, almost as if they're wearing the old big bell-bottom jeans of the 70s, swaying through all in one big motion. Okay? So it does create a sense of rhythm. You know, the repeated repetition, definite rhythm, repeated repetition. Now, rhythm can also come from maybe not necessarily perfect repetition, but this still has a lot of repetition in it, along with lots of variation. But the repetition in things like the thickness of the lines that are used, the countless little dashes along that are filling some of the negative space, train tracks, squiggles, repeating. Okay? And yes, this is the guy that created that coyote icon that you see in a lot of shirts. So, and this is a close-up of that piece, and you can see all these little repeating dots, all formed very similarly, and everything is kind of, it's got to be filled. Everything's got to go in the same thickness, the bodies, the squiggles, the dots. Lots of rhythm in this, but it's almost like visual noise. It's so much. But when you get up close to it, it still holds on to that continuous pattern making. One of the surrealists, Rene Magritte. Now, in this piece, you know, obviously the surrealists, many of them were into dreams or dreamscapes, nightmarescapes, and some people, like Magritte, were into the absurd. Earlier, when we were looking at things like, we did use a piece. What was the piece he had? Oh, This Is Not a Pipe. At the very beginning of the semester, it was a painting of a pipe. It's not a real pipe. You can't smoke it. But adding that "This Is Not a Pipe" to that painting was kind of, again, making fun of the absurd. So here we have lots of rhythm created again by lots of repetition. Okay? And then Chuck Close, we talked about him a little bit at the beginning of the semester. I think I told you the story about how he did these massive self-portraits in the late 60s, early 70s. And then later in life, he had what was called a spinal stroke that partially paralyzed him. So he lost most use of his hands, and now he paints with a gadget that he has attached to his wrists. And now he's kind of, instead of doing these super photorealistic, every pore paintings, he's moved on to these almost pattern-based photorealism. Because if you back away from it, much like pixels on a screen, the resolution tightens and you begin to see how detailed the painting is. But by breaking it into this diamond pattern and then making each one of these little diamond patterns its own individual little color blob painting, that's a kind of a blurry close-up of it, each one of those has lots of variety in them. But there's so many similar shapes, and they're all done in this diamond formation, like almost like floor tile, that he's able to create a sense of rhythm as well as variety throughout the piece. Now this is a piece of kinetic sculpture, which means sculpture that moves in space. Rhythm is created here, again, repeated shapes. But not only that, it also moves, and it has a program that runs its rhythm as well. So this is kinetic rain. (1,216 lightweight aluminum droplets). Polished copper, 180 grams. And it goes in a 15-minute loop. So this is footage. This is located in the main airport of Singapore. And the rhythm is not only the repeated raindrop shapes, but also created by the actual motorized movement of those repeated shapes. So it's a lot like that Magritte piece where all the men are raining down, all the different business people are raining. But in this case, there are all these little, they're not super little, they're about the size, probably a little bit bigger than a softball. If you look at the people to the left, you can kind of see how good size they are. They're not quite the size of a human head either. Now the rhythm pattern is changing. Okay? So very clearly creates a sense of rhythm. All right? Okay, the next principle